Hey guys, it's Logan here with Hydra572. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Cold Steel Voyager. Here I have the XL Tonto. The Voyagers are a great line of knives, and it is my regret that I can't have all of them here in front of you in the various different blade styles and blade lengths. However, it's just not practical for one review for me to go out and buy like 9 knives. This knife is also offered in clip point and in a recurve design that they call Vaquero, however you might say that. Now, as I was writing the script for this video, I kept trying to think of a way to intro by comparing this knife to a firearm. I didn't know if I wanted to compare it to a Glock because of its ruggedness and how it gives you a whole lot of bang for buck. I didn't know if I wanted to compare it to a Mosin Nagant because it is the cheapest option that offers quite a bit of firepower. I didn't know if I wanted to compare it to an AK-47 because it was really, really durable. Ultimately, I came to the decision that I might as well just come out and make the claim that I wanted to make. And that is that if you want a folding knife with a blade that's over 5 inches long, there really isn't a way to go right now for under $200 that isn't cold steel. Now, throughout the video, we'll talk about why you would want a folder that was over 5 inches long, but just know that if you're looking for a really big folder, there's not really a better way to go than cold steel right now for a reasonable amount of money, and the cheapest way to get into Cold Steel's large product line right now is the Voyager series. As for why you would want a really large folder, the only intended usage I could really think of was defensive usage. That means using this knife to protect your life, whether you're a responsible civilian, law enforcement, or military. I don't really think you want to use this knife to be doing your EDC cutting or utility cutting. Even if you wanted a really large blade, I think you'd be better off going with something like the Spyderco Resilience. Your hand is a whole lot closer to the blade, it's a whole lot less cumbersome. Overall, this knife just isn't a utility cutter. It might be different with the large or medium versions of this blade, but the XL is just too large for that task, I believe. Now, for defensive usage, having a really large blade like 5.5 inches gets you a couple things. First off, it gets you a really large handle that can be sculpted to fit the hand and really lock your hand in. Next, it gets you a large blade so that you can keep yourself further away from the person that wants to hurt you. Finally, it gets you the intimidation factor. A really large knife might scare more people away than a smaller knife like, again, say the Resilience might. However, the intimidation factor really does go both ways. We go back to the discussion that we had with the Espada, that this knife will be perceived very differently by a jury and even by the person who might be attacking you. The person who's mugging you, for instance, might only want to take your money, but when you pull this bad boy out, they might feel that their life is in danger, pull out their gun, and cap you. All of those are possibilities, and like I said, this knife will be perceived differently by law enforcement and a jury than something smaller would be. Even something like this you could claim was your EDC cutter that you were using at work, even if you'd intended to use it for a defensive purpose all along. A knife like this, you're going to have a hard time making the argument that it was for anything other than defending yourself. That's not the way that it should be, but political conditions being what they are, it is very worth mentioning and thinking about should you carry a weapon like this. Understand that this will be perceived by all involved to be similarly deadly to a handgun, because it is. I don't want to start with a rant, but it is important to talk about if I'm going to review knives that are this large and this serious. Moving on to another intended usage, I came up with car knife. I've been keeping this in my car quite a bit. On the off chance that I leave my house without a knife, I can pull this bad boy out, stick it in my pocket, and I have a large defensive folder should I be going into someplace where one is permitted. Moving on to pricing, $63 from Blade HQ and $53 from eBay. If you buy from Blade HQ, you are supporting people who make shopping for knives pretty easy, but it's hard to beat a $10 price decrease. On to blade profile, as I already discussed, it's offered in a number of blade profiles. I opted for the Tonto. I typically don't because I feel like it reduces the amount of cutting edge that you get, but in a knife this large, I felt that it didn't really matter, and I thought that it looked really good. The tip is good and strong. I think if you had to do field surgery with this knife, that would be a terrible situation because, as I mentioned, very large and cumbersome, and not really a well-suited blade profile for that, or EDC cutting, but I think you could do it. Like I said, I don't think you're going to be using this tip to tip cut a whole lot because I think of this knife as a defensive knife. The belly, not a whole lot, as you guys can see there. We don't have a whole lot of blade touching the log and not a whole lot of sweep. But as we saw in our consumer proof video, it still has quite a bit of cutting power, and because of the way that your hand is angled, it presents the blade for really powerful slashes, so it might not matter so much. Moving on to the steel, we have AUS 8A, which again, in the consumer proof video and through other testing, I have found to be a perfectly decent steel. It's become in vogue to bash on this steel, and I don't know why. It's very easy to sharpen, and it holds its edge good enough. Moving on to grind, we have a beautiful partial hollow grind. As you guys can see, we have the sharpening flat that makes it much easier if you're using a consistent angle system where you either have to lie the knife down like on an Edge Pro Apex or clamp the knife in like on the Wicked Edge, and the thumb stud is removable, so that's very nice. I think for a defensive purpose it will do just fine and slice really well. And that is very nice of cold steel to make that thumb stud removable. Makes our lives quite a bit easier. For deployment, we pretty much have thumb studs and an inertial opening where you would flick and like that. We do not have the thumb disc wave opener that is offered on some of the more expensive cold steel large knives. And I think the reason is that with these knives being considerably cheaper than other cold steel large knives, they need some features left off so that they don't drive too much purchase away from the other more expensive knives, because they are somewhat similar. So overall, the thumb studs are nice and smooth. The inertial opening is fun, makes a lot of noise. I would like to have a wave opening option, but if Cold Steel wants to keep making money, I suppose I can tolerate that. Moving on to the lock, we have the triad lock, which for a large defensive knife, in my opinion, is perfection. It takes a little bit of extra time to depress that lock. You do have to push pretty hard. It takes some getting used to if it's your first triad lock, but it is well worth it for what it offers in terms of strength. That is available in the cold steel videos showing the testing of these knives and in consumer videos showing both more clinical type testing in a lab and just people going out and thrashing on these blades. These locks just do not quit. It is an incredible lock. That is not to say that I think you should take this thing out and woodcraft with it all the time. A fixed blade will suit that purpose much better, but if you need a high strength application done by this blade, I don't think that you'll be disappointed. If you are going to take it out and thrash on it, which again I don't recommend, I would say it's important to have a set of Torx wrenches with you because the pivot will vibrate loose, and that will be the first thing to fail in this locking mechanism in my experience. Play just a little bit side to side, none up and down. And I have the pivot set a little bit loose just to make that deployment even more fun, a little bit faster. Overall, a great locking mechanism. Some people don't like the feel of back locks. They think they're old. They prefer frame lock, all that stuff. Some of my first knives were back lock, and I don't mind it at all. For the triad lock especially, because it buys you so much extra strength. And for a large knife, that does matter quite a bit with this big hunk of steel out here levering on the handle. We have videos discussing how this works and why it's so strong. It all hinges around that stop pin. Really an incredible addition to a simple design that adds quite a bit of strength. Moving on to the handle. The material is Gryvery. It is very deeply textured with this Celtic cross type texture. It is even more abrasive, tacky, grippy, whatever you would like to say, than the high traction cold steel G10. It is an excellent handle material in my opinion. As you guys can see, we have the closed handle design with a backspacer, which is just fine. It might make cleaning a little bit more difficult. You might have to break a Q-tip in there. The liners are 6061 aluminum, which adds some much needed stiffness. You can feel the handles flex just a little bit if you squeeze hard out here near the edge of the handle, but it is not a problem in terms of strength. The aluminum does its job, adds stiffness, and keeps the knife really light. Overall, the handle, I think, is very well designed. Ergonomics are very good in my opinion. They lock your hand in. I prefer to grip the knife in this most forward position. I think as you get out here, you have the knife in a position where it's going to lever on your wrist pretty hard. And unfortunately for my hand, it puts my thumb right on the lock bar. Would make it too easy to disengage the knife in my opinion. So I stay choked up here, which still gives you plenty of reach, I think. And if you really needed that extra range, you could just keep your thumb down here by the side. For me, it's really natural to want to drop into that Filipino-style grip. Other things ergonomically, it does give you a good option for reverse grip. In both grips, it presents the edge very well. for slashing, cutting, all of those sorts of things. Jimping, we have none, and it's not really needed. We have this thick portion of the spine here where we can rest our thumb in that comfortable Filipino grip. We have a little bit of indentation done there along the back. I personally don't think we need it, but it does look nice, so I suppose that's something. It shows they're thinking about jimping, which is always good. The clip is two-way reversible. You have tip up right side or tip up left side. Some people will complain about it not being tip down. I really could care less because I carry almost all of my knives in the tip up orientation. Some people will of course say that with an abrasive handle material like this that it shreds their pockets. I've carried this knife and other cold steels like my Espada, my AK, day in, day out, and it just hasn't shredded my pockets. It hasn't happened to me. I've done it in a variety of different denim pants and other types of cloth, be they cargo pants or whatever, and I just haven't experienced the problem. If it's a big problem for you, I suppose you can sand down in that area underneath the clip. One thing I would advise is when you get the knife, do that for a couple days. Just weaken the clip up just a little bit because they come very tight from cold steel, which, you know, it's a little quirk. Never had a big problem with it. You guys can see there that with the knife clipped in your pocket, you do have quite a bit showing from that portion up will come out of your pocket, but it's not really easy to tell with that much knife coming out of your pocket that what you have in your pocket is a huge pocket sword. So it's an interesting decision, but it gives you quite a bit to grab onto, which is important with a big unwieldy knife like this, that you make sure that you're getting it out of your pocket good and smooth. So overall, I don't hate it. Moving on to presentation, I think this knife has an aspect of utilitarian beauty. It's certainly not as well stylized, in my opinion, as something like the Espada, which has natural flowing lines that are beautiful. But something about the Voyager is just attractive. The same way that I find a Glock attractive even though it's really ugly. This knife, there's nothing in particular wrong with it. The stonewash is light, but I do think it looks really good. And the handle is nicely contoured, as I said. It presents the edge well, doesn't necessarily look very good, but it presents that cutting edge well and isn't that much more important. So overall, I think the presentation is very good. I prefer the stonewash to a bead blast, which, moving into quality, the stonewash still can rust. We saw that a little bit on Chad's knife, not so much on my knife. Quality otherwise has been spectacular. The hardware has held up just fine throughout the use and abuse I've put on this knife. The edge that it came with was perfection, as is usual for cold steel. Came nice and smooth, all that good stuff. The value is straight up and down incredible. This knife comes in at $53 if you're buying it the most economical way possible. And just look at this slab of steel that you're getting. For a knife this size with a similar budget steel, you pay near the same price. So I really don't think you can beat this thing in terms of value. Again, for someone who wants to carry that large 5.5-inch blade, I think these things are incredible. As we discussed, you get a number of benefits. However, you do also lose some things. You do lose a little bit of the ability to move the knife around quickly. It is light, it feels good in hand, but the fact of the matter is you just won't be moving it around quite as fast as you would something a little bit smaller. Maybe even this knife in large would be more maneuverable, a little bit less cumbersome, so on and so forth. Moving on to competition, as previously discussed, you basically, for a folding 5.5-inch blade, you basically only have other cold steels. Reference the Espada. I want to pick up a Raha soon. They make other knives very large as well. I think the Talwar and Counterpoint recently got extra large editions. Other competition, you can go for a fixed blade. Here's my CRKT Dragon. You can see the size comparison there. It is a little bit smaller and not a whole lot less cutting edge. A little bit stronger because to break this thing you're going to have to shear steel, whereas in this you can break aluminum or Grivory as well. Just a different option, a little bit more concealable. And, you know, it's a whole different beast, really. For a bushcraft type task, which again, that wasn't in my intended usage because I don't think you want to be using this thing for your bush and woodcraft or your utility cutting. For those tasks, for a utility cutter, you will want something a little bit smaller and less cumbersome. For bushcraft, you're going to want a full tang fixed blade. That's just the way it is. Moving on to pass-fail. An emphatic pass. If you are the kind of person who wants either a large backup knife to protect their firearm should somebody try to grab your firearm off your hip, if you are a soldier who wants a large knife that you could maybe do some hard utility cutting with and also have as a backup to your large fixed blade, I think this knife is an incredible option. The other cold steels are very good as well. They are just different. They offer different options. They are all very high quality, and I really don't have a huge specific issue with this blade. I would prefer that wave opener. I don't like the way that in the really extended grip my thumb is on the lock bar. That may change depending on the size of your hand. I think they're incredible for the price. I really don't think you can pass them up if you're the type of person who thinks about carrying a firearm for self-defense, or if you're in a combat type role. Unless you're going for a large fixed blade, I really don't think there's a reason why you should not at least check out a Cold Steel Voyager in XL. I like the Tanto model very much. I think there's plenty of usable edge there. As you guys can see, it is a very large knife. We will move on to some stats really quickly before my ending ramble. The overall length is 12.25 inches, a blade length of 5.5, handle length 6.75, blade thickness 1.57, and a weight of 7.2 ounces. Overall, a very light knife considering the size. My ending ramble is just that if you haven't tried a knife like this out, you really should. The only other folding knife that I could think of for competition, I was so impressed by that I went out and bought the the Quartermaster QTR4, and while this is a beautiful collection piece in terms of a relatively cheap overbuilt folder with a really unique design, with the liner lock being out like this, the way it is really exposed to your hand, I don't feel that it competes in terms of strength and utility for a fighting knife purpose with the Cold Steel Voyager. This is just an incredible option that you can get into for half the cost of the other Cold Steels and figure out if you like carrying a really large knife for defense. I think if you're going to carry a firearm, you have a responsibility to have a plan if somebody tries to steal that firearm from you, and that is a really good plan there, my friend. As I said, lots of inherent responsibilities with carrying a deadly weapon. That is something that you need to think about, ponder, mull over in your head, decide if it's for you, and if it's not, that is a really mature choice to make. And I actually really respect that choice, should individuals make it. But if you're going to defend yourself, your system should be complete. You should have a way to defend your firearm. You should have a plan for if your firearm goes down. And I think a Cold Steel Voyager is a great way to start investigating those options, and it is a great place also to stop investigating those options. This is just an all-around great knife. Relatively specific intended usage, but within that wheelhouse, it is just incredible. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more of the same.